Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're diving into a story that might seem like corporate gossip at first, but trust me, this one cuts deep, straight through the heart of power, family, and betrayal. Imagine standing in a ballroom full of polished shoes and practiced smiles, champagne glasses clinking, soft jazz humming in the background, and then hearing yourself introduced as the leech maid out loud, in front of everyone. You might think you'd crumble. You might think you'd run. But not me. You see, when you've built something from nothing, when you've poured your life into something others now take for granted, there's a quiet strength that settles in your bones, a strength people mistake for fragility. That's where they go wrong. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And please drop your city and local time in the comments below. I want to know just how far this story will travel. Now, turn off the lights, maybe let a little white noise play in the background, and let's begin tonight's journey together. The name tag said, Sophie Westbrook, Director of Design. In gold script, beside her stood my son, Michael Westbrook, Head of Operations. My name tag, it read Martha, Michael's mum, with a little cartoon emoji next to it. Not even my last name, not Westbrook, just Martha. No title, no designation. I could have been anyone's mother, or worse, everyone's burden. And then Sophie, dressed in scarlet like some kind of holiday ornament, raised her glass and said with a laugh that sliced through the room like a blade, "Oh, this is Martha Michael's mother, our little leech." I stood frozen. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was worse, it was polite, the kind that comes with discomfort and complicity. A few executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to sip their drinks or just pretend they hadn't heard. I had chosen a simple navy dress for the evening, nothing flashy. It was the same dress I'd worn to Robert's retirement dinner years ago. Classic, modest, safe. I clutched my handbag like it was a lifeline and looked to Michael. My son smiled, weakly. That kind of smile people wear when they don't know whether to intervene or disappear. Sophie didn't stop. She never does. "She's always hanging around," she added, swirling her wine. "Poor thing can't manage on her own ever since Robert passed. But we try our best, don't we, darling?" Michael nodded, still smiling that stupid frozen smile. I excused myself quietly, saying I needed the restroom, even though I didn't. What I really needed was to breathe, just breathe. Inside the marble-tiled bathroom, I stared at my reflection under the harsh lighting. Wrinkles deepened around my mouth, my greying hair pinned neatly but plainly. My eyes, once sharp, now held the fatigue of 5 silent years. They don't know who I am. That's what I kept telling myself. They really don't know. Because if they did, if they did, they'd know I hold 51% of Westbrook Technologies, the very company they're all toasting tonight. They'd know I'm not just Michael's mum or the widow who won't move on. They'd know that every light in that ballroom, every crystal on the chandelier, every catered hors d'oeuvre was indirectly paid for by me. Robert and I built Westbrook from our garage. We mortgaged our tiny home, skipped vacations, and worked weekends while raising Michael. I took client calls with a baby on my lap. Robert coded through the night while I brewed coffee at 2 a.m. We bled for this. And then Robert died, and I promised him I'd let Michael make it on his own, let him rise without our shadows. He whispered in hospice, hands cold but eyes blazing with hope. "Promise me, Martha." I did. For 5 years, I kept that promise. I stayed out of the spotlight. I watched board meetings through a proxy, using the name Mr. Wilson on paper. I let Michael earn his way, from junior analyst to head of ops. I never once used my position not to favour him, not to intervene, not even to defend myself. Until tonight. Until Sophie. Until I realised Robert never anticipated a woman like her, a woman who would turn my son into a spectator at his own mother's humiliation. When I returned to the ballroom, Sophie was mid-conversation with the CFO. She caught sight of me and waved like we were best friends. "There she is," she trilled. "Tell everyone about your bridge club. Martha, so adorable how you keep busy." I smiled politely. "It keeps my mind sharp," I said. She laughed. "Isn't she just a treasure?" What she didn't know was that my bridge club wasn't a group of ladies playing cards. It was a monthly meeting with my financial advisor, reviewing performance, authorising dividends, monitoring assets, making sure Sophie's designer handbags were still being funded by my company. That night, as Michael and Sophie drove home in their luxury SUV, I called a cab. And in the quiet ride back to my modest home, the same one where we started Westbrook Technologies, I made a decision. Not out of vengeance. Out of love, for my husband's memory, for my son's future, and yes, for my dignity. The leech was about to show her teeth. The rain had started by the time I got home, a soft, steady drizzle tapping against the windows, like the house was whispering back to me. I towed off my shoes by the door, dropped my coat over the same old hook we'd used since Michael was 5, and went straight to the kitchen. The kettle had started to rust near the spout. I liked it that way. The water hissed and fumed until it boiled, filling the room with a kind of warmth I couldn't find anywhere else that night. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around my mug, and stared at a photograph on the wall, me and Robert, young and glowing with ambition. It was the day we got the keys to our first office, nothing more than a converted storage room with bad plumbing and a flickering light bulb. But to us, it was a castle. We were building something together, something lasting. That was the day Robert whispered, "This is just the beginning. Martha, one day this will all be for Michael." He meant it, and I carried that belief through every tax season, every server crash, every sleepless night. What we built became Westbrook Technologies, now a behemoth, now a symbol of everything people admire on paper and forget in practice. After Robert passed, the world looked at me like I should fade too. But Robert had left me something far more powerful than memories. He left me 26% of his shares, and I already owned 25%, the controlling interest. Together, we had always been the backbone of the company, and now I was the whole spine. James Patterson, the family attorney and one of the few people who truly knew, had respected my silence all these years. He never questioned my decision to honour Robert's wish, even when he clearly disagreed. I called him the next morning. "You sound tired," James said as he entered my living room, still sharp as ever in his 70s, wearing the same herringbone coat he'd had since the 90s. "I am," I admitted, "but I think I'm done being invisible." He sat down slowly, giving me space. "Sophie." "Sophie," I nodded, "and Michael." He didn't say a word when she called me our little leech. James's face clouded. "You've given that boy everything." I wanted to give him independence, I corrected, not entitlement. Robert didn't want him to coast through life knowing he had a safety net. He believed in struggle, in earning your way. And he has. Martha, Michael earned his position, but that doesn't give Sophie the right to treat you like furniture. I swallowed. They're planning to move me. Somewhere called Sunset Valley Retirement Community. James nearly choked on his tea. That place with the tranquil forest views and 12,000 a month price tag. The very same. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Then it's time we talk about tobacco options. He pulled a folder from his bag and opened it between us quarterly reports, stock summaries, dividend allocations. Westbrook was thriving. My shares alone were now worth 8 figures. 8. I could buy the entire Sunset Valley complex, rename it, and still have enough left over for Sophie's entire wardrobe, and I wouldn't even break a sweat. But that wasn't the point. I'm not looking to humiliate them, I said. James raised an eyebrow. Oh, no, I want my son back. I want him to remember where he came from, and I want him to see her clearly before it's too late. You can't do that from behind a curtain. I looked back at the photo of Robert and me. No, I suppose I can't. James nodded. Then it's time we dust off Mr. Wilson. Ah, yes, Mr. Wilson, my alias, my shadow self, created to vote anonymously through board meetings, to keep a presence without a face. Everyone knew of him, no one had ever seen him. I'd been Mr. Wilson for 5 years. But this time, I wouldn't just be a name on paper. I would walk into that boardroom, I would sit at that table, and I would make sure Sophie knew exactly who she was dealing with. 2 nights later, I found myself thumbing through an old ledger, our very first business notebook. Robert's handwriting scrawled in the margins, mine boxed in neat columns. We had built $1 million empire on scraps of determination and 3 cups of coffee. The doorbell rang. It was Sarah Miller. Retired now, but once the sharpest CFO in our company's history and still my trusted proxy on the board. You look like you've made up your mind, she said, eyes scanning mine. I have, I replied, but I need you to do one more thing. Anything. Coach me. She laughed, then saw I was serious. I explained everything Sophie's manipulation, the private dinner she had with that man, David Reynolds, who was now pitching foreign expansion projects through Michael, projects that risked not just money but reputations. He's the one pushing the Asia deal, Sarah asked. Yes, and Sophie's helping him get board approval. Sarah's face darkened. Then you need to move fast. I want to attend the next board meeting, I said, as myself, no aliases, just Martha Westbrook, majority shareholder. Sarah sat back. Are you ready for that? I thought of Sophie's smug face, Michael's silence, Robert's fading voice in that hospital room. I've never been more ready. It was a Thursday when I stepped into the lobby of Westbrook Technologies for the first time in years. The last time I'd walked those halls, I was still signing checks with Robert. Now, I was back older, quieter, but sharper than ever, not as a grieving widow or a doting mother, not as a leech, as a force they had underestimated for far too long. Sarah had insisted I dress for battle. You're not here to play chess, she'd said. You're here to flip the board. So I wore a tailored charcoal grey pantsuit, a subtle pearl brooch from my anniversary with Robert, and low black heels I could barely walk in. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I looked nothing like the woman Sophie had insulted in a navy dress with scuffed shoes. At the front desk, the receptionist looked up, briefly puzzled by my appearance. Name, she asked. Martha Westbrook. I said, I'm here to see Michael Westbrook. I'm his mother. She blinked, then offered a professional smile, one I could tell was masking judgment. I didn't blame her. I didn't look like I belonged, at least, not in the way she expected. Please wait here, she said, dialing his extension. A few minutes later, Michael appeared down the hallway, expression unreadable. His tie was slightly askew, and the bags under his eyes told me stress had settled in deeper than I realized. He hesitated when he saw me, then approached with a polite, almost robotic hug. "Mum," he said, voice low, "what are you doing here?" "I brought you lunch," I replied, lifting the brown bag. "Chicken salad on sourdough, your favourite." He glanced over his shoulder, clearly scanning for witnesses. "We can go to the break room," he said quickly, gesturing to the left. Not his office. The break room. I smiled anyway. We sat at a small table, just like we used to when he was a kid and brought me pretend tea on a plastic tray. But this wasn't pretend, and nothing about his nervous fidgeting felt like childhood anymore. "You look tired," I said gently. Michael sighed. "Big proposal coming up. Sophie's been helping me get ready for it. It could mean a VP title if it goes through." I tilted my head. The Asian expansion. His eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you know?" "Oh, I hear things." A beat of silence passed. He didn't ask further. He didn't want to ask further. "Sophie says it's the right move," he added. "The board's been too cautious for too long. We need to grow if we're going to stay relevant." I nodded, pretending to consider it. She also mentioned moving into Lakewood Estates. He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, she's set on it. It's ambitious." I let that hang. After a moment, I excused myself to find the ladies' room, but instead, I wandered the halls of the company I'd built. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and I passed framed photos of product launches and award ceremonies, none of which bore my face. Of course, just Robert, in the early years, and then, more recently, Michael and Sophie. I paused at the conference wing. A door stood slightly ajar. And that's when I heard it. Sophie's voice. "Trust me, David," she said. "This is already lined up. Michael gets promoted, you get the Asia contract, and I make sure everyone's happy." "David?" So this was him. "And how do you plan to handle the board?" David asked, his voice amused. "I've prepped Michael for weeks. He'll deliver the pitch. Once he's VP of Operations, the board won't question it. They'll trust him." A pause. "And if they don't?" he asked. Sophie chuckled. "Then we wait 5 years. He inherits controlling shares at 40. That mysterious shareholder can't hide forever. Until then, I'll handle things from the inside." My breath caught. This wasn't just manipulation. It was a coup. A pause followed, and then laughter. And then worse. The unmistakable sounds of something intimate. I stepped back, heart pounding. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't unhear it either. I left, fast, back down the hall, back past the photos, out the revolving doors, and into the street where I finally exhaled. When I got home, I called James. "She's not just pushing Michael, she's steering the entire board toward a trap," I said, pacing. "She's working with this David Reynolds, and they're using Michael to funnel this expansion through." James sighed. "Then we can't wait. You'll need to show up at the next board meeting in person." "Not as Mr. Wilson," I said firmly. "As me." He agreed. "We'll need to loop in Sarah and prepare documentation." Before hanging up, I paused. "James?" "Yes." "She's having an affair." He was quiet for a beat. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure enough." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Sophie's laughter, Michael's silence, Robert's voice whispering, "Protect him, Martha." And for the first time, I questioned if keeping my promise had protected him at all. Rain tapped the window like an old metronome the next morning, steady and familiar, but inside my chest, the rhythm was anything but calm. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Michael once spilled his cereal while Robert read the business section aloud, and stared down at the minutes from our last board meeting, every line of it, neatly annotated by Sarah. Across from me sat James, and beside him, Sarah Miller herself, now in jeans and a sweater, but still radiating sharpness. David Reynolds has pitched this kind of expansion at 3 other companies, Sarah said, flipping through a file. Each one crashed within 2 years. One filed for bankruptcy, the others barely escaped legal action. And now he's aiming for Westbrook, James muttered, lips tight. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek, and Sophie's handing him the keys. We can block the deal, Sarah added, but only if we show up in person. The board's gotten too comfortable with anonymous shareholders. Then it's time I become visible. Sarah glanced at me sideways. Are you sure, once you step into that room as Martha Westbrook? There's no going back, no more hiding, no more mystery. I've hidden too long. I said, I've kept my promise, and it nearly let Sophie turn my son into a puppet. James folded his hands on the table. We'll prepare everything, Q. You'll attend as Mr. Wilson, but you'll be you, legally and financially. There's no question. But the optics will be, well, let's just say Sophie won't take it gracefully. I don't need her to take it gracefully. I just need the truth to come out. Sarah smirked. I think I liked you better when you were quietly terrifying. That afternoon, we drove to the tailor. You can't walk in there dressed like a PTA president, Sarah had said. You're a majority shareholder of a multi-million-dollar tech firm. So I stood in front of the mirror in a fitted navy suit, low heels, and a crisp blouse, my silver hair swept back into a sleek bun. No more cardigans, no more soft scarves, no more Martha the widow. Even I barely recognised myself, but it felt right. It felt like armour. I still don't like makeup, I mumbled as the stylist worked her brush across my cheek. It's not for you, she replied. It's for them. When I stepped out of the salon, Sarah whistled low. They're not ready. We went over every talking point in the car, every line of defence, every number I needed to challenge Michael's proposal, though it broke my heart to do so, because it wasn't just Sophie's scheme I was about to confront. It was my son. The Westbrook Technologies headquarters looked almost sterile from the outside. Glass, steel, and ambition stacked 40 floors high. We entered through the private elevator reserved for board-level guests. Even the receptionist didn't look twice. Mr. Wilson's name had carried enough weight over the years that no one dared challenge it. Sarah handed me a slim leather portfolio. Don't speak until the end, she whispered as the doors opened. Let them underestimate you. Let Sophie feel safe. I nodded. We entered the boardroom, its walls all glass and chrome, the city skyline shimmering behind it like a backdrop to a stage play. The long table was already filling. Michael sat halfway down, eyes focused on his notes. Sophie leaned in beside him, dressed like she was heading to a fashion shoot. At the head of the table sat Richard Foster, chairman of the board. Beside him, 2 legal representatives and a few long-time board members, some of whom had known Robert and me in the early days. As Sarah introduced me as Mr. Wilson, now attending in person, I kept my expression calm, just a neutral investor, nothing to see here. Michael barely glanced at me. But Sophie, oh Sophie, her eyes narrowed like a hawk clocking a shadow. I could see her trying to place me. Something in her tensed. But she said nothing. The meeting opened with routine updates, sales, projections, HR numbers. Then came the expansion. Richard cleared his throat. Next item, Michael Westbrook's proposal for regional growth into East and Southeast Asian markets. Michael stood, adjusted his tie, and launched into a polished presentation slides, graphs, ROI charts. He spoke confidently, but with that underlying desperation I'd come to recognize he was trying to impress, to prove, to please. Every projection was inflated, every timeline shaved short. The risk was glaring. Beside him, David Reynolds nodded along like a proud coach. Sophie beamed. And then Richard asked, "Questions from the board?" I raised my hand. The room turned. "Yes, Mr. Wilson," Richard asked, blinking. I stood slowly, portfolio in hand, just a few clarifications. Michael smiled, trying to stay professional. Of course. Your cost breakdown assumes vendor negotiations in Singapore will result in a 12% discount on infrastructure, I said. What's your source? He hesitated. Projections from Reynolds Consulting. I see, and the projected user adoption rate in Shanghai is that based on field-tested models or internal assumptions. More hesitation. Sophie shifted in her seat. David spoke up. We've run simulations that indicate those numbers are within an acceptable confidence range. And you've provided those simulations to the board, I asked. Silence. I let the pause stretch. I move that we delay the expansion vote until a full due diligence report is conducted, I said finally, voice calm but firm, and that the board reviews Mr. Reynolds' prior engagements. David's jaw tightened. Sophie leaned forward. Excuse me, but who are you to... And that's when I said it. I'm Martha Westbrook, majority shareholder, founder, and Michael's mother. The silence cracked like glass dropped on marble. Michael's face drained of colour. Sophie's hand, still mid-gesture, froze in mid-air. And suddenly, no one in that room was looking at me like a leech. For a moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the hum of the ceiling vents and the distant patter of rain against the windows. Michael looked like I had just punched the breath out of him. Sophie, for once, had nothing clever to say. And David Reynolds, his signature smug smirk faded into something far less composed. I took my seat again, my hand steady as I opened the leather portfolio and slid a stack of neatly prepared documents toward the chairman. These are the original partnership certificates between Robert Westbrook and myself, I said softly. When he passed, full controlling shares of Westbrook Technologies transferred to me. I've remained behind the scenes for years at my husband's request, but after recent developments, particularly those involving questionable expansion plans, I felt it was time to step forward. Sophie finally found her voice. "This is outrageous," she spat. "There's no way this can be real. She's been sitting at home, baking casseroles and attending knitting clubs." "Actually," I said with a faint smile, "it's a bridge club, and it meets quarterly with my financial advisor and Mr. Patterson here." James gave a small wave. "And for the record," I added, "I don't bake." Laughter, awkward but real, broke the tension in the room. Sophie stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "You lied to us. You lied to him." She pointed toward Michael, whose expression was still somewhere between shock and something deeper. "I honoured a promise," I corrected. "Your father didn't want Michael burdened with expectations. He wanted him to find his own path without living under our shadow. And he did." My eyes shifted to Michael. You did, sweetheart. He blinked, once, but still said nothing. Richard Foster, the chairman, cleared his throat. Given this new revelation, I think we should pause all votes related to the Asia expansion until we've fully reviewed the proposal and Mr. Reynolds's background. Sophie scoffed. You can't be serious. This was a fully vetted. It was a rushed deal, I interrupted, and I believe some of the data came from compromised sources. David finally spoke, tone clipped. With respect, Mrs. Westbrook, I've run successful expansions for firms far larger than yours. Your sudden reappearance hardly gives you the authority to undermine. I own 51% of this company. I said simply, that gives me every right to protect it. The room sat in still silence again. The motion to postpone the expansion was passed almost immediately. Sarah offered a concise legal statement to seal the delay, and James handed out additional files detailing David Reynolds' known affiliations. When the meeting adjourned, most of the board members left in quiet pairs, whispering among themselves. I remained seated, waiting, breathing, trying to read the chaos in Michael's posture. He stayed behind too. Eventually, we were the only ones left except Sophie, who was pacing by the window like a lioness who'd just realised the cage door was locked. You planned this, she hissed. No, I said. You did. I just responded. She turned on Michael. Say something. He rubbed his face with both hands. His voice cracked. I don't even know what's real anymore. Sophie walked up to him, low and tight. You're going to let her ruin everything we've built. She's been lying to you. Michael's voice hardened. You mean like you've been lying to me about David, about pushing that expansion through behind my back? Sophie blanched. That's business. That's how things work at this level. He stepped back from her. No, he said, that's how you work. He looked at me then. Why didn't you tell me? The question hit me square in the chest. Because I was afraid, I admitted, afraid you'd feel like your success wasn't yours. Afraid I'd break the promise I made to your father. Afraid that once you knew, we'd lose whatever honesty was left between us. He said nothing for a long while, just stared out the window as the city darkened and headlights blinked on below. Then, without looking back, he said, I need time. Of course. I need to think. Of course. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Thank you for protecting the company. His voice was quieter now. And for protecting me. Then he was gone. Sophie didn't speak. She just grabbed her designer handbag with shaking hands and stalked out after him, her heels clicking like tiny hammers of fury on marble floors. I sat there, alone, for a long time. Not triumphant, not relieved. Just still. I didn't want a war. I wanted my family back. I wanted my son to see clearly, to choose wisely. And for the first time in years, I had finally given him the truth to do so. The following morning, my coffee sat untouched. I'd brewed it out of habit, but my stomach turned at the thought of drinking it. The house was quiet, too quiet. No humming computers, no late-night phone calls from Robert solving bugs, no baby Michael babbling from the playpen. Just the ticking clock and the lingering echo of what had happened in that boardroom. I wasn't sure what would come next. I just knew Sophie wouldn't go quietly. Sure enough, at 10:43 a.m, my phone rang. James! Brace yourself, he said without preamble. Sophie has just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I rubbed my temple. On what grounds? She's pushing a vote to restructure the executive board, claiming it's necessary to streamline operations and align with future growth. But here's the kicker: she's targeting the long-time board members who've always been loyal to you and Robert. She's trying to eliminate our institutional allies, I murmured. She's smart, James said, ambitious, but desperate. She knows her window is closing. And Michael. He's signed off on the meeting. That stopped me cold. He what? He authorised the motion late last night. I stood from the table, pacing. That means she's gotten to him, or he's panicking. Maybe both. A knock at the door interrupted us. Through the peephole, Michael. His posture was tense, shoulders high, jaw tight, eyes stormy. I'll call you back, I told James, heart thudding. I opened the door. He didn't wait to be invited in. Were you ever going to tell me? He snapped, stepping into the hallway like a gust of wind. Or was the plan to keep lying forever? I closed the door behind him, keeping my voice steady. Michael, please. You've been Mr. Wilson this whole time. You've owned the company, all while I've been killing myself, trying to prove I belong there. I swallowed hard. Yes. He laughed, hollow and bitter. Unbelievable. I never lied about loving you, I said softly, or about how proud I am. You built your career, you earned your respect. Nothing I own can take that away. He paced the living room like a man stuck in a maze. Sophie found out through a PI, he said. After the board meeting, she was suspicious. She said your questions were too precise, too informed. So she had me investigated. He flinched at that, but didn't deny it. She was trying to protect me, he said. That's what she told me. Michael, I stepped closer. Sophie is protecting herself. She's been using you, and now she's trying to eliminate every board member who remembers what this company stood for. He stopped pacing. You don't know that. I do, I said, and so do you. I handed him the folder Sarah had compiled months ago, inside detailed reports on David Reynolds' failed ventures, financial conflicts of interest, and Sophie's connections to them all. She doctored your projections. She pitched you as a pawn, and she's been planning a takeover from the moment you brought her home. His hands trembled as he opened the folder, page after page, his confidence drained from his face. I didn't want to believe it. No one wants to believe the person they love is using them. He sat down on the edge of the couch, defeated. I thought she was ambitious, like Dad. No, I said gently, kneeling in front of him. Your father built things. Sophie takes things. He looked at me with tired eyes. And what about you? You kept all this from me. Why? I took a breath. Because I promised your father he wanted you to rise on your own, not as the heir to a fortune, but as a man of your own making. And you did, Michael. You really did. But you watched me struggle, he whispered. You watched Sophie belittle you. Why didn't you say something then? Because I thought I was honouring Robert's wishes, I said, but I realise now I may have misunderstood what he meant. He never wanted me to disappear. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked, quietly, what do we do now? We stop Sophie, together. That night, I called Sarah and James. We can't let this restructuring pass. I said, if we lose those seats, we lose the soul of the company. Sarah responded with a plan. Tomorrow, you'll attend as yourself. I'll handle the legal angles. James will back you with documentation. But Michael needs to show the board where he stands. I looked at my son across the table. He nodded. I'll be there. We strategized until late into the evening. called loyal board members, scheduled document deliveries, drafted statements. By midnight, I was back at the mirror, practicing my voice, not the one that apologized at parties, but the one that once negotiated supplier contracts while nursing a baby on her hip. The woman who built an empire. At 8:55 a.m. the next morning, I entered the boardroom not as Mr. Wilson, not as Michael's mother, not as a guest, but as Martha Westbrook, majority shareholder, co-founder, and the woman no one saw coming. This time, I wouldn't be asking for a seat at the table. I was the table. The boardroom shimmered with early morning light reflecting off the glass walls, casting long shadows over the polished mahogany table. It smelled faintly of cologne, coffee, and quiet tension. As I stepped in, I saw Sophie already seated, radiant in a tailored cream suit, her hair twisted into a perfect knot, a power outfit if I'd ever seen one. Michael entered just behind me, his face composed but unreadable. He gave me the faintest nod. Sarah and James took their places, briefcases clicking open, legal pads at the ready. Richard Foster, ever the calm centre of chaos, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Let's begin. This emergency session has been called to review Ms. Sophie Westbrook's proposal to restructure the executive board. Heads turned. Some faces curious, some tense, a few, I noticed, were already shifting away from Sophie. She stood confidently. As you all know, she began smoothly, Westbrook Technologies is at a pivotal point. If we want to remain competitive globally, we need fresh leadership, new voices. Today, I propose we relieve the 3 oldest board members, Mr. Crane, Ms. Jacobs, and Mr. Lee, and replace them with a younger advisory panel more aligned with our future direction. She paused, looking around like a campaigner scanning her voters. These members have served admirably, she said, with artificial sweetness, but their time has passed. Crane looked like he was about to swallow his pen. Then Richard gestured toward me, Mrs. Westbrook, as majority shareholder. Do you have any thoughts? I stood slowly. No notes, just my truth. I do. Sophie folded her arms, the corners of her mouth twitching. I'd like to begin by reminding this board that experience is not a weakness. Mr. Crane, Ms. Jacobs, and Mr. Lee were all part of the founding advisory team that helped Robert and me build this company from 2 desks and a dream. I heard a sharp intake of breath. The words Robert and me hung heavy. Westbrook Technologies has always been about balance, risk and reason, growth and integrity. What's being proposed today is not innovation. It's a hostile grab for power disguised as progress. David Reynolds shifted in his seat. I've reviewed Mr. Reynolds' past work, I continued. 3 companies brought him in under similar pretense. All 3 are now defunct or bleeding out. If we bring him on and purge the voices who remember how this company was built, we're not moving forward. We're wiping our history clean to make room for someone else's payday. Murmurs spread across the table. Sophie stood abruptly. This is fear talking. This is a desperate attempt to cling to the past. No, Michael said suddenly, his voice firm and clear. Everyone turned to him. I authorised this meeting, but not because I agreed with it. Sophie's face flushed red. Michael stepped forward. I spent all night reading documents my mother gave me, not just about Reynolds, about the decisions this company has made, and I've realised something. I've been so busy trying to prove I belong here that I didn't stop to ask who I was proving it to. His eyes locked on Sophie's. You've lied to me. You've used me. And you almost helped dismantle everything my parents built. She blinked fast. Michael. He turned to Richard. I withdraw my support for this proposal, and I recommend we formally cut ties with Reynolds Consulting. David stood up. This is ridiculous. I've brought millions in investment to companies. And drained them dry, I said, holding up a folder James passed me. Let the record show that Mr. Reynolds has ongoing litigation in Hong Kong and Singapore for breach of fiduciary duty. David's eyes narrowed. This is character assassination. No, Richard said finally, closing his folder with finality. This is accountability. The vote to reject the proposal passed unanimously. David stormed out. Sophie, however, didn't move. Are you really going to let her ruin us? She hissed at Michael. Michael looked at her, weary but certain. You already did that yourself. She stood slowly, clutching her purse like it was armour. I hope you're proud of yourself, she said to me. I didn't flinch. I'm proud of my son. She left without another word. The boardroom exhaled. Richard turned to me. Mrs. Westbrook, would you like to address succession planning while we have quorum? Yes, I said, glancing at Michael, but I'd like to propose something collaborative. He met at my gaze. We work better together than apart, I said, and I think it's time we rebuild openly. A few heads nodded. Later, as the board filtered out, Michael lingered beside me, hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough, for not seeing it sooner. I'm sorry too, I whispered, for staying quiet too long. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Dinner tonight, he asked. Just us? I nodded. And I'll make your favourite. No bridge club. I laughed. Only if you want a financial report over dessert. He chuckled and walked out with me, shoulder to shoulder. This wasn't the end. But it was the first chapter of something new. That night, Michael showed up to dinner 10 minutes early, holding a bottle of wine and a grocery bag. He was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, no tailored jacket. No corporate stiffness, and for the first time in years, he looked like my son again. I thought I'd help make dinner, he said. You're 37 years late, I teased, taking the bag from him. Inside were 2 ears of corn, a lemon, and a pack of pasta he sheepishly admitted he didn't know how to cook. Still, the gesture was more than enough. He followed me into the kitchen like he used to when he was little, asking questions about boiling water and watching me season chicken like I was casting a spell. We moved in rhythm, not saying much, and yet saying everything. Over dinner, we didn't talk about the company, not at first. We talked about Robert, about how he used to whistle while typing code, and how he once accidentally deleted an entire week's work and spent 2 days fixing it without ever losing his temper. I thought he was invincible, Michael said quietly, swirling his wine, and I guess I thought you were just background. The words weren't cruel, they were honest. I said, for a long time, by choice. Your father had the spotlight. I had the ledger. We balanced each other. He nodded, slowly. You know, he added, Sophie always said you were afraid of progress, that you clung to the past. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and leaned on the counter. She thought I was afraid of her, but she mistook silence for weakness. Michael chuckled. That's kind of your superpower, isn't it, being underestimated? Comes in handy, I said with a smile. You should try it sometime. We sat on the porch after dinner, 2 glasses of tea in hand, watching the wind stir the garden Robert and I had planted years ago. The jasmine was blooming, faintly fragrant in the dark. Michael set down his glass. I've been thinking, maybe it's time we rebrand. I looked at him, Rebrand. He nodded. The company. Everyone associates Westbrook Technologies with Dad, but you were always there too. Maybe it should reflect that. I blinked, surprised. You want to change the name? Not change, evolve. How does Westbrook and Wilson Technologies sound? A laugh escaped me. Mr. Wilson finally gets his name on the door. Michael grinned. I think he earned it. The moment hung sweetly between us, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. You know, he said after a while, I've started sleeping better. That's good, I replied. No more Sophie stress. He hesitated. She texted me. Yesterday. I turned my head slightly, listening. She said she regrets everything, that she only wanted what was best for us, that she was scared. And what do you think? He exhaled. I think she regrets losing power, not me. Smart boy. I was a fool for a long time. No, I said gently. You were in love. That makes all of us fools, at least once. He looked at me then. How do you forgive someone who manipulated your life? I paused. You start by forgiving yourself for not seeing it sooner, for needing the illusion, and then you stop letting that person rent space in your head. He smiled again, a quiet smile. We sat in silence a while longer before he stood, brushing off his jeans. I should go, he said. Early meeting tomorrow. We're reviewing candidates for the new board seat. I raised an eyebrow. Anyone promising? There's this retired CFO, he said, eyes twinkling, sharp as a tack, fierce as ever. Is she terrifying? Absolutely. Sounds perfect. He kissed my cheek before leaving. Thanks for dinner, Mum. And there it was again, Mum, with no sarcasm, no resentment, just warmth. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into the dark. Then I walked back inside and placed his wine bottle on the mantel, next to the photo of Robert holding a baby Michael in his arms. I whispered, He found his way, Robert, just like you wanted. Then I turned off the lights, leaving the jasmine to bloom in peace. 2 months passed. Summer crept into town with its long light and slow golden evenings. The garden bloomed in waves hydrangeas, then roses, then the stubborn lavender Robert had planted, even though it never took well to our soil. Michael came by almost every Sunday now. Sometimes he brought takeout, sometimes groceries, sometimes just himself. But each time, he stayed longer. At Westbrook Technologies, now officially Westbrook and Wilson Technologies, the changes were subtle but significant. Michael had moved into the interim CEO role temporarily. With Sarah by his side as an executive consultant, the board remained intact, wiser, warier, but also energized. I hadn't returned to the office since the emergency meeting. That was never the plan. My place was never in the day-to-day grind anymore. My job was to safeguard the heart of what Robert and I built and make sure it beat in time with the future. Still, I stayed connected. Each month, Michael sent over reports, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He'd ask for my thoughts, and then here's the miracle: he listened. One Sunday evening, he brought over a stack of resumes for an open leadership role. I want someone who understands growth, he said, but who respects where we've come from. I flipped through a few profiles. That's rare. I know, he said, but I also didn't think I'd ever have Sunday dinners with my mum again. So miracles do happen. He was healing, not just from Sophie, but from the version of himself she had pushed him to become, the version who needed to prove things to people who didn't matter. I filed the divorce papers last week, he said quietly. while I was stirring soup. I paused, then nodded. I didn't say anything before because I didn't want to disappoint you. You didn't, I said. If anything, I'm proud. It takes strength to walk away from a cage, even if it's made of gold. She made me feel like I was never enough. I looked at him, and now I know that wasn't about me. He stirred his tea with a small smile, and maybe I was never supposed to fill her idea of a perfect husband. Maybe I was just supposed to find out who I really was underneath all that pressure. We sat on the porch again that night, watching fireflies blink across the hedges. You think Dad would approve of the name change? He asked suddenly. He might laugh, I admitted, but deep down, yes, he'd love that you honoured both of us so. I still miss him. I do too, every day. Michael leaned back, hands behind his head. I think about how many times I sat in that boardroom not knowing you were there, voting as Mr. Wilson. You never noticed the proxy with all the notes in the margins. I just thought it was some crusty investor with control issues. I laughed so hard I choked on my tea. Well, I said, wiping my eyes, you weren't entirely wrong. He looked over. I've been thinking, when the time's right, we should expand the mentorship program, bring in more young people, teach them how to build companies with integrity, not shortcuts. Now you're thinking like a Westbrook and a Wilson, I said, patting his hand. Before he left that night, he paused at the door. You know, Mum, I don't think I ever said thank you. For what? For protecting the company, for protecting me even when I didn't see it. I squeezed his arm. That's what mothers do, even when their kid's a CEO. After he left, I wandered through the garden with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The moonlight softened everything, even the sharp stones Robert used to curse while mowing the lawn. I paused near the bench by the old magnolia tree and sat down, listening to the hum of cicadas and the slow whisper of wind through the leaves. The woman Sophie had called the leech maid had once almost believed it. Almost. But now she sat in peace. She had no need to announce herself, no craving for revenge. She had her son. She had her name. And she had her story, finally, fully her own. The day the final legal documents came through, I was sitting by the window, sipping chamomile tea. A courier dropped off a slim envelope, no fanfare, no ceremony, just a signature on the dotted line, notarized, stamped, and certified. Sophie was officially out. The divorce had been finalized. Her shares, once held in trust through Michael, were relinquished. The prenup Robert insisted on so long ago, just in case. Martha, he'd said had done its job. She walked away with a tidy settlement, but no stake in the company, no seat at the table, no more power to pull strings. Michael called me that afternoon. She didn't say a word when she signed, he told me. No apology, no bitterness either, just silence. That might be the most honest thing she's ever said, I replied. He chuckled, soft but steady. It's strange. I'm not angry anymore, just tired. You're healing, I said. That's what it feels like. The quiet on the other end told me he agreed. That weekend, I invited him over for dinner again, only this time I had a surprise waiting. When he arrived, I handed him a small wrapped box. Inside was a key, simple, silver, and new. What's this? He asked, turning it over in his hand. A new office space, I said, downtown. It's for the mentorship initiative. You'll call it what you want, staff it how you like. I'll fund the first 2 years, but it's yours, Michael, not Westbrook's, not mine, yours. He looked stunned. I thought we were rebuilding the company, he said. We are, I nodded, but I want you to have something that's not in my shadow or your father's, a place where you lead with the lessons you've earned, not the ones you inherited. He sat down, slowly, gripping the key like it was more than metal, like it was belief. I don't know what to say. Say you'll build something honest, something better. He smiled. I will. We held a small gathering 2 weeks later, not a corporate gala, not a press event, just a private dinner with close friends, board members, and the few staff who had stood by Michael through everything. He gave a toast that made Sarah cry and James clear his throat a suspicious number of times. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind, he said, but I've come to understand it's about who you lift up while you're still here. I've had the privilege of being lifted up by the two strongest people I've ever known, my father, who dreamed big, and my mother, who never stopped protecting that dream, even when no one knew it was hers. He looked right at me then. The room followed. For years, I didn't see her. Not really, but I do now. There was a standing ovation, not out of obligation, out of awe. Afterward, as we walked to the car, Michael tucked my arm into his. You know what Dad would have said if he were here tonight. What? He smiled. He'd say, took you long enough. Martha, now take a bow. I laughed. Your father hated speeches. Only because yours were better. That night, back at home, I lit a candle in the kitchen and left it on the counter. It was something Robert and I used to do when one of us had something to celebrate, but the other wasn't home yet. A little tradition we never stopped. The flame flickered softly, dancing in its own quiet applause. I walked through the hallway, brushing my fingers across photo frames Robert at a product launch, baby Michael in overalls, a Christmas where the tree leaned left and no one cared. In my room, I pulled out an old notebook, the one with my early plans when Westbrook Technologies was just sketches, late nights, and risk. I flipped to the last page. There, I wrote, the company survived. Michael came back. The truth was worth the wait. And I finally remembered who I was. I closed the notebook, turned out the lights, and let the darkness wrap around me not as an end, but as a beginning. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready for it.